Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. In this video, I will present the results of my review of a scientific article with title The Relationship Between Indonesian EFL Learners' Vocabulary Knowledge and English Competence. In this video, I will not only discuss the content of the article but also provide my analysis and personal feedback on each section from the abstract to the conclusion. And then before we move on the topic, allow me to introduce myself. I am Reza Rizky Fatima, a student from PKRI Wiranegara University majoring in English Education. I am a class of 2020 student and my student number is 39. And then now we move on the topic. The first is article identity. This article was written by Lintang Wilujeng Hartini and Ananda Suryardini from Universitas Islam India. This article was published on January 10th, 2024 in the journal English and Education, or we call it JEA, or in Indonesian JEA, which has been indexed by Sinta 2. The main focus on this study was to find out the relationship between EFL student productive vocabulary knowledge and their general English competence using a test called LEX 30 and report card scores. And then the next is abstract. According to my understanding, this abstract includes several things, namely first, vocabulary mastery is important, but high school students in Indonesia is still have a mastery that is below the target. According with happens in Indonesian school, there are still many students who do not have enough English vocabulary. And then secondly is the aim of this study was to investigate the relationship between English vocabulary knowledge and English competence of Indonesian senior high school students. Furthermore, the study used LEX 30 media. And LEX 30 media is a web media to measure productive vocabulary knowledge. And then the fourth is the LEX 30 doesn't directly measure vocabulary size, but it's still relevant for assessing student performance in general language skills like reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And then finally, the author provides a statement: students with vocabulary knowledge tend to have good English scores. And then my personal feedback is the abstract is concise, informative, and contains the key points, background, objective, method, and findings. But the writer needs to explain what is meant by English competencies. Is a combination of reading and writing, speaking score, or other aspect. And the sentence students with good vocabulary knowledge, good English scores should be present in form of quantitative findings. And then the next is introduction. In the introduction, the author explained the Indonesian students generally have not reached the target of 4,000 until 5,000 vocabulary words as stipulated in the national curriculum. Most students have not even reached 3,000 vocabulary words. The introduction also explained the concept of vocabulary size and productivity vocabulary. Vocabulary is important in language proficiency. Vocabulary plays a role in receptive and productive knowledge. Educate vocabulary knowledge is necessary to understand English in an EFL context. Vocabulary is often underestimated in EFL classes. In Indonesia, despite its importance, EFL students still lack in vocabulary acquisition. Indonesian students' vocabulary mastery is still low. The curriculum target middle school students should be master 4,000 until 5,000 words, but in fact, many students are below this target. Studies show most students have not even reached 3,000 words. Nurwani Afriyandi Mustafa, lack of vocabulary hinders academic understanding and communication. Productive vocabulary scores LEX 30 matters. LEX 30 tests is used to measure the ability to produce vocabulary spontaneously. Like 30 scores correlate with fluency. And then the previous research shows a strong correlation, and then my feedback is the narrative is quite long, it's very long for me, and some paragraph could be condensed to focus on the research scope and the contribution of the study. Definition of productive vocabulary and vocabulary size need to be summarized in one place, not scattered. The research question is clear, but the purpose of the study should be reiterated at the end of the introduction in one explicit sentence. And then the next is a research method. The study used a correlative quantitative approach. The sample was 110th grade student in one of the high school in Yogyakarta. The sampling technique used was convenience sampling. The instrument is using the productive vocabulary text like 30 and English competency score from student report cards. Implementation of the Lex 30 test conducted in 3 classes done via smartphone by students consists of 30 questions, targets 120 words, time 30 minutes, and maximum score is 120. And then writing error are considered correct. And then my feedback is mention correlational design, number of participation, and convenience sampling technique instrument. Describe online leaks 30 and report card score composition. Explain the reliability and validity of the LEX 30 and the reason for choosing this instrument over other media. Procedural details how instruction we are given, how to minimize misunderstanding that later lower on one student's scores. And then the next is findings. The first finding was the LEX 30 test result. The majority of students score high between 90 until 120. However, there was a considerable gap in score, as there were 6% of students who only scored 1 until 30. This was due to miscommunication and delays the test. The second finding is the English competence score. A total of 50% of students score 80 under 89 with a minimum score of 61 and maximum of 91. The scores were more evenly distributed than LEX 30. And then my feedback, the data is very well presented and easy to understand, but the writer should explain quantitatively the impact of miscommunication at the time, how many students were affected, not just a narrative. And then the next is discussion. The author concludes that vocabulary plays an important role in students' performance across the 4 language skills. These results are consistent with previous research by Uchihara and Saito and Walters. Advantages and limitations of the LEX 30 test. Advantages: easy to use, quick to evaluate, suitable for computed tests, provide immediate and comparable results between students. Limitation: does not measure exact vocabulary size like PVLT, only measure breadth of vocabulary, not depth. The LEX 30 was also compared with the PVLT instrument, and the author mentioned that the LEX 30 is more practical but less precise for measuring vocabulary size. And then my feedback is very good, linking finding to literature, Uchihara and Saito and Walters, and pedagogical implication. Discussion section occasionally repeat finding data could be condensed to focus on interpretation and implication. Comparison of LEX versus PVLT is interesting but needs to be linked directly to outcomes. Example is how score reflects students' productivity readiness. And then the last is conclusion. The conclusion states that the study found a significant positive correlation between student productive vocabulary knowledge through the last 30 tests and their English language competence, although it did not show a direct cause and effect relationship. The study has limitations such as the research location being limited to one school, limited measurement tools, and the absence of a listening skill test. Therefore, it's recommended that further research involve a wider sample and a wider range of instruments. The finding emphasized the importance of vocabulary teaching in English language learning. Teachers are advised to enrich students' vocabulary consistently, for example, by introducing new vocabulary in each lesson and holding small quizzes to support the achievement of the national curriculum target of 4,000 until 5,000 vocabulary words. This research has some limitation, only conduct in one school, limited measuring tools, and listening not tested. The author suggests the future research involve a wider sample, use the other measurement tools, and explore different teaching methods. Teachers are also advised to actively enrich student vocabulary for by introducing new vocabulary every lesson and holding small quizzes. And then my feedback is very good summary, systematically organized, provide suggestion for future research. However, the conclusion should include more concrete practical recommendation for teachers. And then in the closing, I would like to emphasize two important points. The first is productive vocabulary is a strong indicator of students' language skills, and the second is teachers should make vocabulary teaching a top priority in English language learning. Thank you for your attention, guys. Hopefully this video can provide new knowledge and make you want to add more English vocabulary. Goodbye everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.